The ink freezes before Captain Erickson can finish the word. His breath forms crystals on the logbook page as he writes by candlelight in the cramped cabin of the Helga. Outside, pack ice groans against the hull, a sound that has haunted his dreams for 43 days. The pen scratches across paper already brittle from cold. Day 44. Position uncertain. Ice holds fast. Stores nearly gone. He pauses, sets down the pen, listens. The groaning has stopped. In the sudden stillness, something else reaches his ears. A wet sliding sound along the starboard hull, like kelp dragging against wood, but deeper, heavier. Erickson moves to the porthole. Ice crystals cloud the glass. He scrapes them away with fingernails already blackened by frostbite. Nothing but white darkness beyond. The sliding sound continues, methodical, deliberate. He returns to the logbook. The pen feels foreign in his stiff fingers. Something moves beneath the ice. The candle flame flickers, dies. In the darkness, the sliding sound grows louder. The Helga had been a proud ship once. Built in Bergen 3 years prior, her oak planks seasoned by North Sea storms, she carried 22 men north through the Denmark Strait in early spring of 1892. Captain Lars Erickson commanded her with the confidence of 15 Arctic seasons. The crew knew their work, finding bowhead whales in the margin waters where ice meets sea. They found ice instead. By late April, leads that should have carried them deeper into whaling grounds began to close. Erickson pushed north anyway, chasing reports of whale spouts beyond the pack. The Helga threaded through channels barely wider than her beam, her bow crushing thin ice, wake freezing behind her within hours. The trap closed on April 29th. Morning Watch spotted it first, a white line stretching across their northern horizon. Pack ice, moving south with the current, grinding toward them with the inexorable weight of glaciers. Behind them, the leads they'd traveled had already begun to freeze. "All stop," Erickson ordered. The engine fell silent. In the sudden quiet, they could hear it, the deep rumble of ice against ice, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. First, Engineer Olsen emerged from the engine room, wiping oil from his hands with a rag already stiff from cold. "How much time, Captain?" Erickson studied the approaching pack through his spyglass. The ice moved slowly but without pause, blocks the size of houses tumbling over each other, pressure ridges rising and falling like the spine of some massive creature. 2 hours, maybe 3. They spent those hours in preparation, securing the whaleboats, reinforcing the hull with timber, laying out survival supplies on deck where they could be reached quickly if the ship was crushed. The work kept their minds occupied, hands busy, but their eyes kept turning north. At 3:17 p.m., the ice reached them. The first contact was gentle, a whisper of pressure against the bow. Then the Helga began to rise, her hull lifting as ice floes slid beneath her keel. She groaned, but held. The crew allowed themselves to hope. The hope lasted until midnight. Pressure increased gradually, then suddenly. The ship tilted 15 degrees to port as ice blocks, driven by currents and wind, piled against her starboard side. Somewhere below deck, something cracked with the sound of a rifle shot. "All hands on deck," Erickson called. They stood in the bitter wind, 22 men watching their ship disappear into a landscape of white chaos. Ice surrounded them now, stretched to every horizon. The Helga sat trapped in a cradle of frozen seawater, her masts swaying as pressure from the pack twisted her hull. Olsen approached the captain. "Sir, we should signal for help." Erickson looked at him. At 19, the young engineer still believed in rescue, still thought someone might come. "Signal whom, Mr. Olsen?" The question hung in the air like their breath. Days became indistinguishable from nights. The Arctic sun, hanging low but constant, cast the ice field in perpetual twilight. Time marked itself in other ways, the steady consumption of their coal stores, the gradual emptying of the water barrels, the slow retreat of their food supplies from the ship's pantry to smaller caches they could reach if the hull gave way. Erickson maintained discipline through routine. Morning watch, noon observations, evening reports. The logbook entries grew shorter as days passed, but he continued to write them. Navigation fixes, even though they went nowhere. Weather observations, though the weather never changed. Crew conditions, though those only worsened. By day 20, they were eating leather. harnesses first, then belts, finally pieces cut from their boots, boiled with the last of their salt and whatever ice they could melt for water. The cook, Anderson, had stopped apologizing for the meals. No one expected better anymore. The cold was constant. It crept through the ship's hull, through their wool coats, through the layers of blankets they wrapped around themselves during the brief periods when they tried to sleep. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes with surgical precision, but the ice held them gently. That was the strangest part. For all its power, the pack seemed content to cradle the Helga rather than crush her. Pressure came and went in rhythms they learned to predict. Morning brought grinding sounds as temperature changes shifted the flows. Afternoon brought relative calm. Evening brought new arrangements of the ice around their hull, but never the catastrophic compression they'd feared. Seaman Peterson suggested they were protected. "The ship sits in a soft spot," he said during one of their evening gatherings in the main cabin. Lucky placement. Others disagreed. Hansen, the oldest hand aboard, had sailed these waters for 30 years. "Ice doesn't show mercy," he said. "It's waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Hansen shrugged. "Ice doesn't tell you its plans." They posted watches anyway. 2 men on deck at all times, despite the cold, despite their weakness from hunger, watching for changes in the pack, for leads that might open, for any sign that their prison might shift. The watches reported the same thing, night after night. Stillness. Until day 43. Larsen saw it first. The young lookout had drawn midnight watch, stationed near the bow where he could observe the ice field spreading north toward the horizon. He'd wrapped himself in every blanket he could find, but still his breath came in sharp puffs that froze before they could dissipate. At 2:30 a.m., something changed in the pattern of the ice. Larsen rubbed his eyes, thinking fatigue was playing tricks with his vision. But the disturbance remained, a subtle depression in the pack, roughly circular, about 50 yards from the ship's port side, as if something beneath the ice was pushing upward. He watched for 10 minutes before calling down to the deck. "Captain, something strange to port." Erickson emerged from his cabin within moments, moving with the careful steps of a man conserving energy. He joined Larsen at the rail and followed the lookout's pointing finger. The depression had grown larger. "How long has it been like this?" "Just started, sir. Wasn't there during my last sweep." Erickson studied the disturbance through his spyglass. In the strange Arctic twilight, details were difficult to distinguish, but the depression was unmistakable. The ice sagged inward as if something below was drawing it down. "Could be a seal hole," Larsen suggested. "Sometimes they keep breathing holes open." "In pack ice this thick?" Larsen had no answer. They watched for another hour. The depression neither grew nor shrank. It simply remained, a break in the otherwise uniform surface of their frozen prison. At 4:15 a.m., bubbles began to rise. Small at first, like those from a diver working beneath the surface. Then larger, bursting through the ice with enough force to spray chips of frozen seawater into the air. Whatever moved below was substantial. "Wake the crew," Erickson ordered. Within minutes, 21 men stood at the port rail, staring at the disturbance that had transformed their static world into something dynamic and unknown. The bubbles continued to rise, creating a small lead of open water where none had existed moments before. Hansen spoke first. "Whale." "Wrong season," said Olsen. "Too far north." "Walrus colony?" "Too deep." They offered explanations because explanations felt necessary, but none of them truly believed their own theories. The bubbling continued with mechanical regularity, as if something below was breathing in measured intervals. At dawn, the disturbance stopped. The open water began to freeze almost immediately, forming a thin skin of ice that thickened as they watched. Within 2 hours, only a slight discoloration in the pack marked where their mystery had occurred. But the crew remained at the rail. Something had changed. The ice, which had seemed like mere geology for 43 days, had revealed itself as something more complex, something alive. The Helga suddenly felt very small. The scratching began 3 nights later. Erickson was attempting sleep in his cabin when the sound reached him through the hull, a rhythmic scraping against the ship's planks just below the waterline. At first, he assumed it was ice, shifting with the current, abrading the wood with its movement. But ice didn't move in patterns. The scraping came in sequences, 3 long strokes, followed by silence, then 3 more. Always the same rhythm, always the same location along the starboard hull. Ericsson pressed his ear to the wall and listened. The wood transmitted the sound clearly. Something was running along the ship's exterior with deliberate precision. He dressed quickly and made his way to the deck. The night watch consisted of Larsen and Bergen, both men huddled near the mainmast where a small brazier provided minimal warmth. They looked up as Ericsson approached. "Captain," Bergen nodded, "all quiet." "You haven't heard the scratching?" The 2 men exchanged glances. "What scratching, sir?" Ericsson led them to the starboard rail. They stood in silence, breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. The scratching resumed. All 3 men heard it clearly, a deliberate dragging sound along the hull, moving from bow to stern with measured pace, not the chaotic grinding of ice, but something methodical. "Jesus Christ," Bergen whispered. "Quiet," Ericsson ordered. They listened as the scratching reached the stern, paused for exactly 10 seconds, then began again at the bow. The same pattern, the same rhythm. "Should we investigate?" Larsen asked. Ericsson considered this. The ship's whaleboats hung in davits along the port side, still accessible despite their circumstances. But climbing down to ice level in darkness, with their weakened condition, seemed unwise. "We observe," he decided, "nothing more." The scratching continued for 2 hours. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, it stopped. The 3 men remained at the rail until dawn, but heard nothing more. Daylight revealed the evidence. Parallel grooves ran along the Helga's starboard hull, carved into the oak planking with surgical precision. Each groove was roughly 6 inches wide, extending from just above the waterline to perhaps 2 feet below it. The marks spiraled slightly as they progressed from bow to stern, as if whatever had made them had twisted while moving. Olsen lowered himself over the side on a rope to examine the damage more closely. When he climbed back aboard, his face had lost its usual color. "It's not random scratching," he reported to the assembled crew. "These are deliberate marks, something with multiple appendages." "Appendages?" Hansen asked. Olsen held up his hand, fingers spread. "Like this, but larger, much larger, and more of them." The crew gathered around the starboard rail to see for themselves. The evidence was undeniable. Something had systematically examined their ship during the night, leaving behind proof of its investigation. "What kind of creature leaves marks like that?" Bergen asked. No one answered. In their collective experience, hundreds of Arctic seasons among them, none had encountered anything similar. But worse discoveries awaited. During their morning inspection of the ice around the ship, they found the dogs. The Helga carried 6 sled dogs, Greenland huskies trained for ice travel, kept in a makeshift pen on the ship's port side. When the crew went to feed them their daily ration of seal meat, they found the pen empty. The dogs had vanished without sound, without struggle. The pen's gate remained latched and secure. No tracks led away across the ice. "Maybe they jumped out," Larsen suggested. "Dogs can jump." Hansen examined the pen's construction. The walls stood 4 feet high, built from ship's timber and reinforced with rope. Not these dogs, not in their condition. The crew had been sharing their meager rations with the animals. The dogs, like themselves, had grown gaunt and weak over their weeks of imprisonment. None possessed the strength for a 4-foot vertical leap. "Then where are they?" Olsen asked. The ice around the ship showed no disturbance, no holes, no tracks, no sign that anything had crossed its surface during the night. The dogs had simply ceased to exist. Ericsson organized watches differently for their second night of contact. Instead of 2 men on deck, he positioned lookouts at multiple points around the ship: bow, stern, port, and starboard. Each man carried a lantern and instructions to signal immediately if anything unusual occurred. The crew ate their evening meal in silence. Dried fish and melted ice, the same ration they'd consumed for weeks. But tonight, the familiar routine felt different. They were no longer alone on their frozen sea. At 11:47 p.m., the port lookout signaled contact. Ericsson rushed to the port rail where Seaman Nielsen stood with his lantern held high, its flame dancing in the Arctic wind. "There, Captain," Nielsen pointed into the darkness, "moving along the ice." Ericsson followed the man's gesture but saw nothing beyond the range of their lamplight. The ice field stretched away in familiar patterns of ridges and depressions, unchanged since their arrival. "What did you see?" "Something large, sir, moving between the pressure ridges, keeping low to the ice." "Animal?" "I don't know, sir. The shape wasn't right for any animal I know." They maintained their vigil until dawn, but saw nothing more. The port side remained quiet, undisturbed. The starboard side told a different story. When morning came, they discovered that the scratching had resumed. New grooves appeared alongside the previous ones, deeper this time, carved with more force. Whatever examined their ship was growing bolder. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Hanging from the bow rail, they found Hansen's harpoon. The veteran seaman had lost the weapon 2 weeks earlier when it fell through a gap in the ice during a fishing attempt. The harpoon had sunk into the dark water beneath their prison and been forgotten. Now it hung from their bow rail, but transformed. The iron shaft, originally straight and true, had been twisted into impossible curves. The metal showed signs of tremendous pressure, bent and rebent until it resembled a piece of rope rather than a weapon. The head remained sharp, but the shaft had been tortured into a shape that defied explanation. "Nothing has the strength to do this to iron," Olsen said, running his hands along the twisted metal. Hansen examined his ruined weapon with the attention of a craftsman. He'd forged the harpoon himself before the voyage, selecting the finest Swedish iron, tempering it to perfection. "This iron was designed to penetrate whale hide," he said finally, "to hold fast against a creature weighing 50 tons. He held up the twisted shaft. "What kind of strength does this require?" Dr. Sarah Chen adjusts her glasses and leans forward in her laboratory chair, surrounded by the controlled environment of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Outside, New England autumn paints the landscape in familiar colors. Inside, she contemplates the impossible. The historical record of the Helga incident presents us with a fascinating problem, Dr. Chen begins, her voice carrying the measured cadence of academic inquiry. "We have sworn testimony from multiple witnesses, physical evidence documented by Danish maritime authorities, and circumstances that challenge our understanding of what's possible in Arctic waters. The modern laboratory feels distant from the frozen wasteland of 1892. Computer monitors display oceanographic data, water temperature readings, current patterns from the Denmark Strait. The technology that surrounds Dr. Chen represents more than a century of advancement in marine biology. But the questions raised by the Helga remain as mysterious as ever. When we examine the surviving accounts," she continues, "certain details demand scientific attention. The systematic nature of the hull markings, for instance, suggests deliberate behavior rather than accidental contact. The evidence had been preserved by the Danish court that investigated the incident. Photographs of the twisted harpoon, measurements of the hull grooves, sworn statements from 7 surviving crew members. Each survivor told the same story, with variations only in perspective and detail. Something had examined their ship methodically, night after night, leaving behind proof of its presence. Giant squid represent the largest known invertebrates on Earth, Dr. Chen explains, pulling up images on her monitor. Specimens have been documented at lengths exceeding 40 feet, with tentacles capable of extraordinary strength. The screen shows photographs of Architeuthis ducks, the giant squid that has haunted maritime legends for centuries. Massive creatures with eyes the size of dinner plates, tentacles lined with rotating hooks, bodies designed for deep water hunting. But giant squid are tropical and temperate species, she notes. They inhabit warm currents, feeding on deep sea fish and smaller cephalopods. The Arctic environment represents the opposite of their preferred habitat. Temperature readings from the Helga's location show water barely above freezing, salinity levels that would challenge most marine life, an ecosystem more suited to seals and polar bears than massive cephalopods. Yet the physical evidence suggests something with cephalopod characteristics, Dr. Chen admits. The marking patterns on the hull match what we might expect from large tentacles. The systematic searching behavior aligns with cephalopod intelligence. She pulls up additional data, ocean depth charts from the region where the Helga was trapped. The numbers are surprising. Most of the Denmark Strait shows typical Arctic depths, relatively shallow water over continental shelves. but the area where the Helga was caught sits above an unusual geological feature. The depth chart reveals an underwater canyon previously unmapped in 1892, extending down more than 2 miles into the Earth's crust, a deep-water habitat hidden beneath Arctic ice. It's possible, Dr. Chen says carefully, that unusual geological conditions could support unusual biology. Deep-water currents might carry warmer water into the canyon. Geothermal activity could create microenvironments. She pauses, considering her words. But we're still discussing theoretical biology. No cephalopod species has been documented at the size suggested by the Helga evidence. The square cube law places physical limits on how large soft-bodied creatures can grow. The mathematics are unforgiving. As creatures increase in size, their volume grows faster than their strength. A squid the size suggested by witness accounts would collapse under its own weight, unable to support its massive body. Which brings us to the most troubling aspect of the case, Dr. Chen continues. The crew's claim that the creature pulled their ship underwater. The Danish Maritime Court convened on September 15, 1892, to investigate the loss of the whaling vessel Helga. 7 survivors provided sworn testimony regarding the circumstances of their ship's destruction. The court transcripts, preserved in Copenhagen's maritime archives, present a consistent narrative despite being gathered from men who had been separated for weeks following their rescue. Seaman Nielsen testified first. "It came during the storm. We'd been hearing the scratching for days, but that night was different. The wind was howling, and the ice was shifting around us like it was alive." First Engineer Olsen's account provided technical details. The ship began listing to starboard at approximately 2 a.m., but it wasn't ice pressure causing the tilt. Something was pulling us down from below. Captain Ericsson's testimony proved most detailed. "I observed what appeared to be tentacles, pale in color, wrapped around the bow section. The appendages were of extraordinary size, perhaps 2 feet in diameter. They contracted with visible force, drawing the ship downward into an open lead that had not existed moments before." The court questioned each witness extensively. How could they be certain of what they observed in darkness during a storm while fighting for their lives? The survivors provided corroborating details: the sound of wood splintering under pressure, the sight of their ship's masts disappearing beneath dark water, the terrible silence that followed. Lookout Larson described the final moments. "The bow went under first, then the rest followed quick. The creature pulled us down like we weighed nothing. One moment we were trapped in ice, the next we were swimming in open water. Only 7 men survived. They were found 3 days later by Inuit hunters, half frozen and delirious, clinging to debris from their ship. 15 crew members, including Engineer Hansen, had vanished with the Helga." The Danish court faced an impossible decision: accept the testimony of reliable witnesses describing impossible events, or dismiss their accounts as hallucination brought on by starvation and cold. The court chose a middle path. They recorded the testimony without judgment, noting that circumstances beyond the experience of this tribunal had resulted in the ship's loss. Dr. Chen reviews the court documents on her computer screen, cross-referencing witness statements with contemporary marine biology. The survivors' descriptions present specific challenges to our understanding of cephalopod behavior, she notes. Giant squid are ambush predators. They wait in deep water for prey to approach, then strike with speed and precision. The systematic investigation of the Helga described by witnesses differs markedly from known squid behavior. Days of careful examination, methodical marking of the hull, gradual escalation of contact. These suggest intelligence and patience beyond what science attributes to cephalopods. Furthermore, Dr. Chen continues, the coordination required to pull a 200-ton vessel underwater would require multiple creatures working in concert. Squid are typically solitary animals. She pauses at a particular section of Ericsson's testimony. The captain described tentacles of uniform pale coloration. Deep-sea cephalopods typically show dark pigmentation, adaptations to low-light environments. Each detail in the historical record challenges scientific understanding in specific ways. The size, the behavior, the environment, the apparent intelligence. Every aspect pushes against the boundaries of known marine biology. But perhaps the most intriguing element, Dr. Chen says, is what happened after the sinking. The research vessel Aurora cuts through North Atlantic swells, her hull, reinforced for Arctic exploration, her instruments calibrated for deep-water investigation. Dr. Chen stands in the ship's laboratory, watching sonar displays paint pictures of the seafloor 2 miles below. The expedition to locate the Helga had taken 3 years to organize. Funding came from a consortium of maritime museums and marine research institutes, all intrigued by the historical mystery. Modern technology offered tools unimaginable to 19th-century investigators. GPS coordinates placed them precisely above the location described in Danish court records. Underwater cameras would soon provide visual confirmation of what sonar had detected. Initial scan shows a large debris field, reported sonar operator Martinez. Consistent with a surface vessel impact, the screens revealed the broken remains of wooden ships scattered across the canyon floor. Hull sections, mast fragments, metal fittings corroded by a century of saltwater exposure. The pattern suggested catastrophic structural failure rather than gradual sinking. Depth at impact site, 11,847 feet, Martinez continued, well beyond recreational diving limits. Dr. Chen studied the sonar images with growing excitement. After more than a century, they were seeing the final resting place of the Helga and her crew, the evidence that might finally explain what happened during those terrible nights in 1892. "Deploy the ROV," she ordered. "Let's see what's down there." The remotely operated vehicle descended through layers of increasingly cold water, its cameras and lights creating a small bubble of visibility in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean. At this depth, no natural light penetrated. The world existed in perpetual night. As the ROV approached the seafloor, details became clearer. The Helga's bow section lay partially buried in sediment, her wooden hull surprisingly well preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor environment. Metal fixtures showed extensive corrosion, but the basic structure remained identifiable. "There," Dr. Chen pointed at the monitor. "Damage patterns along the hull." The ROV's cameras revealed systematic destruction of the ship's starboard side. Not random impact damage from the fall to the seafloor, but deliberate crushing that had occurred before sinking. Wood splintered inward, as if squeezed by enormous pressure. The spacing between crush points, Dr. Chen measured the damage on her screen, roughly 6 feet intervals, consistent with multiple pressure sources applied simultaneously. Multiple tentacles, in other words, coordinated application of force that had collapsed the ship's hull like crushing an egg, but the most disturbing discovery waited in the canyon beyond the wreck site. "Dr. Chen," Martinez called from his station, "you need to see this." The sonar operator had been mapping the surrounding seafloor while the ROV investigated the ship. His screens showed the canyon extending deeper into the Earth's crust, but also revealed something else entirely. Shape unlike anything they'd expected to find. "ROV to coordinates 6347N, 28.91W, Dr. Chen ordered. "Maximum descent." The vehicle turned away from the wreck and moved deeper into the canyon, following sonar guidance toward the anomaly Martinez had detected. As it descended, the water pressure readings climbed beyond normal operational limits. At 13,200 feet, the ROV's lights illuminated something that shouldn't exist. Curled against the canyon wall, partially concealed by sediment accumulation, lay what appeared to be organic remains of extraordinary size. The shape suggested a cephalopod body, but scaled beyond any known species. "Tentacle diameter approximately 8 feet, Dr. Chen recorded, her voice steady despite the implications. "Body length. Impossible to determine fully due to the curled position." The ROV moved closer, its cameras revealing details that challenged everything she understood about marine biology. The creature's body showed signs of advanced decomposition, but the cold, low-oxygen environment had preserved basic structure. Most disturbing was the evidence of recent disturbance. Sediment patterns around the remains showed signs of movement within the past several months. Not the gradual settling expected from a century-old carcass, but active displacement. "It's been moving," Martinez observed. Recently, Dr. Chen studied the images, her scientific training warring with the evidence before her eyes. The creature was clearly dead, had been dead for decades at minimum, but something had disturbed its resting place. There could be others, she said quietly. The implication hung in the laboratory air like a physical presence. If the historical accounts were accurate, if multiple creatures had attacked the Helga, then this massive carcass might represent only one member of a larger population. We need more time down here, Dr. Chen decided. Extended ROV deployment, comprehensive photography, sample collection. But as she spoke, the ROV's sonar detected new movement in the canyon depths below their position. Something large, something active, something that preferred the darkness of the deepest water. The Aurora's expedition had found answers to a 130-year-old mystery. They had also discovered that some mysteries prefer to remain buried. The Aurora retreats from the investigation site as North Atlantic weather deteriorates into the kind of storm that claimed so many vessels in these waters. Dr. Chen secures the ROV footage in her laboratory, knowing she possesses evidence that will reshape marine biology, if anyone believes it. The journey back to Woods Hole provides time for analysis, but also for questions that have no comfortable answers. The footage is undeniable, a creature of impossible size resting in deep water where no such creature should exist. Yet the scientific community will demand explanations that Dr. Chen cannot provide. The biological mechanics don't work, she tells her research partner, Dr. William Ross, as they review the ROV data in the ship's laboratory. Cephalopods of this size violate every principle of invertebrate physiology. Ross examines the measurements they've recorded. The square cube law should make it impossible. The creature's own weight should crush its internal organs. Unless we're missing something about deepwater adaptation, Dr. Chen suggests. The pressure at 13,000 feet might actually support larger body structures. They consider the possibilities. Geothermal vents providing unusual energy sources, specialized organs adapted for extreme pressure, evolutionary pathways unknown to surface-dwelling science. But each explanation raises additional questions. The historical accounts describe the creature's ability to surface, Ross points out, to operate in shallow water where it attacked the Helga. That requires adaptations to both high and low pressure environments, Dr. Chen nods. And the intelligence displayed during the ship's examination. That level of problem-solving ability suggests brain development far beyond known cephalopod capacity. The evidence points toward a species that shouldn't exist, displaying behaviors that contradict established biology, inhabiting an environment that should be hostile to its survival. Yet the ROV footage provides undeniable proof. As the Aurora continues its voyage, Dr. Chen compiles her preliminary report for the expedition sponsors. She chooses her words carefully, knowing that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that extraordinary evidence often fails to convince closed minds. Woods Hole. Oceanographic Institution receives Dr. Chen's initial findings 3 days after the Aurora's return to port. The expedition summary includes technical specifications, photography, video documentation, and careful scientific analysis. Expedition to locate the remains of the Danish whaling vessel Helga has resulted in significant archaeological and biological discoveries. The report begins. The wreck site has been positively identified and documented. Dr. Chen presents the facts without speculation. GPS coordinates, depth readings, structural analysis of the ship's remains, the physical evidence that any maritime museum could accept and display. Hull damage patterns suggest catastrophic structural failure, consistent with external pressure applied systematically along the vessel's length, she writes. The nature of the pressure source requires additional investigation. The report's language grows more careful when addressing the biological discoveries. Large organic remains observed in the proximity of the wreck site present taxonomic challenges that warrant further study, she notes. Preliminary measurements suggest cephalopod characteristics at scales not previously documented in Arctic environments. Her academic career depends on maintaining credibility within the scientific community. Claims about sea monsters would destroy her reputation, regardless of supporting evidence. The report stays within bounds of acceptable speculation. But privately, Dr. Chen knows what she observed. The creature in the canyon represents something beyond current scientific understanding. Its existence challenges fundamental assumptions about marine biology, about the limits of life in Earth's oceans, about what might still remain undiscovered in the deep water that covers most of the planet. The Woods Hole Board of Directors reviews the expedition report during their quarterly meeting. The archaeological discoveries receive approval for publication in appropriate maritime journals. The biological findings are classified as requiring peer review and additional verification. Dr. Chen expected this response. Extraordinary evidence must pass extraordinary scrutiny. The scientific process demands skepticism, particularly when dealing with claims that challenge established knowledge. But the ROV footage remains secure in her laboratory. The measurements are precise. The photographic evidence is undeniable. Something waits in the deep water north of Iceland, something that challenged a whaling ship more than a century ago and may still inhabit the dark canyon where the Helga rests. 6 months after the Aurora expedition, maritime databases begin recording unusual incidents in North Atlantic shipping lanes. Commercial vessels reporting equipment malfunctions during transits through the Denmark Strait. Fishing boats returning with hull damage consistent with ice contact despite moderate weather conditions. The reports follow patterns that Dr. Chen recognizes from historical accounts. Systematic damage to ship hulls, equipment disappearances without explanation, crew members describing sounds they cannot identify. Most incidents occur in deep water, areas where the ocean floor drops away into unexplored canyons and trenches, places where unusual marine life might exist beyond human observation. Dr. Chen compiles these reports privately, noting correlations between incident locations and underwater geological features. The patterns suggest something significant, but something she cannot prove without additional evidence. The insurance industry takes notice of increasing claims from vessels operating in previously safe waters. Lloyd's of London initiates an investigation into unexplained vessel damage in North Atlantic routes. Their findings remain confidential, but rumors circulate within maritime circles. Insurance rates increase for certain shipping lanes. Commercial fishing operations avoid specific coordinates without explanation. The ocean keeps its secrets, but those secrets occasionally reach the surface. Dr. Chen reviews the ROV footage one final time before filing her complete expedition report. The images remain as disturbing as they were 6 months ago. Proof of life beyond scientific understanding, evidence of intelligence that challenges human assumptions about the natural world. She considers the surviving accounts from the Helga. 7 men who insisted until their deaths that something impossible had destroyed their ship. Men whose testimony was dismissed as hallucination or hysteria. The ROV footage suggests they told the truth. In the depths of the canyon where the Helga rests, sediment continues to shift around massive organic remains. Current patterns disturb the seafloor in ways that suggest ongoing movement. Something in the deep water responds to changes in pressure, temperature, seasonal variations in marine life. The Arctic Ocean covers vast territories that remain unexplored. Its deepest trenches have never been systematically investigated. Water temperatures and pressure conditions create environments alien to surface life. In such places, evolution might follow pathways unknown to terrestrial science. Intelligence might develop in forms beyond human recognition. Creatures might exist at scales that defy biological understanding. The sonar image that concluded Dr. Chen's expedition remains classified in Woods Hole archives. The shape it captured in the deepest part of the canyon defies easy interpretation. Organic curves suggesting a body of extraordinary size, arranged in positions that could indicate rest or simply death. But the sediment disturbance around the shape tells a different story. Fresh movement in an environment where change occurs over geological timescales. Evidence that something in the deep canyon responds to stimuli from the surface world. The ocean holds memories in its deepest places. Memories of vessels that disappeared without explanation, of crews who reported impossible encounters, of evidence that challenges human understanding of what shares the planet. In 1892, the crew of the Helga discovered they were not alone in Arctic waters. Their encounter ended in tragedy, but their testimony survived to challenge future generations. Modern science possesses tools that 19th-century investigators could never imagine. Deep-water exploration capabilities, genetic analysis, digital documentation that preserves evidence with perfect clarity. But some questions remain as mysterious as ever. In the deepest parts of Earth's oceans, where pressure and darkness create conditions beyond human experience, life may have followed evolutionary paths that science has never considered. Intelligence may have developed in forms that bear no resemblance to terrestrial models. The Aurora's expedition proved that the Helga's crew told the truth about their encounter. Something extraordinary inhabits the deep water north of Iceland, something that examined their ship with systematic intelligence before pulling it into the depths. Whether that something still moves through Arctic waters, whether it represents a surviving member of an unknown species, whether it poses any threat to modern vessels, these questions remain unanswered. The ocean keeps its deepest secrets well, but occasionally those secrets rise to disturb the surface world. They leave evidence in twisted metal and damaged hulls. They challenge human assumptions about what is possible in the natural world. They remind us that Earth's oceans remain largely unexplored, that vast territories of our planet harbor life forms beyond current scientific understanding. The crew of the Helga encountered one such life form during their imprisonment in Arctic ice. Their testimony, preserved in Danish court records, provides a window into an encounter between human beings and intelligence that operates according to rules we do not yet comprehend. The canyon where their ship rests continues to harbor secrets that may never be fully understood. In its deepest reaches, where light has never penetrated, where pressure creates conditions alien to surface life, something waits in the darkness. The sonar images suggest it has been waiting for a very long time.